Our last speaker is Dan Sedwick, and I'm sure Dan is very familiar to you, and you probably know him from his websites and auctions, and his father's was around for many years, and then Dan took over the business. And so we've always wanted Dan to be a speaker, but it was always a conflict with the New York International Show. This year we were able to get him in, we're really happy about that. But his topic is Arce's Doubloons, and he wrote a new book about that, which we've talked about earlier. And the book is available for sale here, and he'll sign books. Thank you. Anyway, so I'm going to turn this over to Dan, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Before he leaves the stage, though, please give Ben a round of applause. He's done so much for the treasure industry with the 1715 Fleet Society, and it was a very big help for me, both the society and Ben personally, in getting this book done. So I'm glad that we can recognize him. I figured most of you know who I am if you don't know me personally. I know a lot of you personally. I have, of course, all my company is all here, and friends from England in the business, and of course family, relatives, my wife, of course, and I even have a neighbor here. So if you haven't gotten to meet them, they'd be happy to say hi. But I'm honored to have them and all of you here. This is quite a crowd, and I'm just very glad to see so much interest in this. At the end of the day, this is really just a book presentation. I've already done the work, and it's out there for you to buy and enjoy and see, but I thank you for allowing me this opportunity to at least explain a little bit of it to you. Just a little bit about us in the 1715 Fleet Society. I'm actually member number 2 in the 1715 Fleet Society, and from the beginning, my company's been a sponsor of these events. We're just very happy that we're able to participate quite a bit more this year. So to introduce the topic, as anyone who's familiar with the 1715 fleet knows, the heart of any Spanish colonial era shipwreck is treasure, which is generally in the form of coins. And in the case of the 1715 fleet, it is hand-struck gold and silver coins known as cobs, which I'm not going to get into. I have another book that goes into all of that. But what I'm focusing on is the gold, which is, of course, what you prefer to find on the shipwreck, and specifically what they called doubloons, or at least what the pirates called doubloons. The gold cobs from the 1715 fleet come from 3 major mints: Mexico City, Mexico, Lima, Peru, and Bogota, Colombia. And the designs from these 3 mints are quite different, so it's very easy to distinguish between the 3. This is what the Mexican mint coin and the Lima mint coins look like. Generally, you'll hear them referred to as just Mexicos or Limas. That's easy enough. But for some reason, people in the business don't always like to say Bogota, or they have some trouble with the accent at the end, so you just hear the term bogeys. Is everyone here? Raise your hand if you've heard of the term bogey. Okay. Yeah, well, it's a different kind of bogey. It might even be spelled differently. But yeah, it's look like, I would say, half or a majority. So if you are familiar with that term, then you recognize these coins. These are bogeys. And these are just the obverses, which is the front of the coin, which shows a shield design. And it's kind of hard to tell on these coins, but the elements are supposed to be the same. This is where all the information is. The shield tells you all of the varieties. The other side of the coin, which is a cross, is a bit more generic, but that also has varieties. And the problem with these coins, as you can tell from this photo, is that the explicit data, in other words, the legends, all the king's name, the assayer, the date, those are in the peripheral legends. And you don't see that on these coins. So, well, I mean, sometimes you do, but you don't see them here. So the challenge is to be able to identify the date and time period, or time period, for each of these coins just by looking at the central elements, in this case the shield, but also the cross. And with this book you can do that. I want to talk for a moment about how this all began. Excuse me one second. I'm not left-handed, so I have to switch. So, like my sister. The genesis of this project was in 2021. I gave a presentation about Colombian gold cobs at the 3rd International Convention of Historians and Numismatists in Cartagena, Colombia. Here you can, if you'd like, you can make note of the YouTube address if you'd like to see that talk, the video. I thought it'd be an easy topic for me because I've been around these coins my whole career. I've been studying and selling and even collecting them for 35 years now, and basically ever since my father, Dr. Frank Sedwick, took an interest in them in the 1980s in articles. Here's a picture of him. Also, you have Joseph Lasser and Jorge Emilio Restrepo here, and they had already organized all the Colombian gold cobs and presented them in the final version was the book you see there on the right, Coins of Colombia by Jorge Emilio Restrepo in 2012. So I assumed for my talk that all I had to do was just expand on what's in that book. But when I got to the 1715 fleet period issues, the bogies, I soon realized that book was just the tip of the iceberg. There was way more to it. They were far more complicated than anyone had realized. And while I did the best I could for that talk, I knew that the challenge was on and I had to step up. And it took 4 years, but what I did was I completed a dye study of these coins and was able to sequence the dates. That's the book that I'm presenting today. So just to give you an idea of how these coins are made, because when we're talking about a dye study, we are talking about basically an exhaustive exercise in gathering up as many coins as you can and matching them up, making sure that they were, or at least seeing which ones were made from the same dyes. The dye is what you see here. It's that thing that he has in his hand. It's the tool that is used to impart the design on the coin. So you can see this is how the hand striking is done. The design is crude typically, but then it's made worse, as you can tell here, by double striking, poor centering, uneven details due to the variation of the thickness of the coin. It was very hard to get a perfect coin this way, and almost always they didn't. So matching the dyes is a pretty big task. Once you match them though, then you have kind of a sequence, and you can do everything chronologically and know when a coin was made, within a year or two anyway. And what happened was that the obverse and reverse dyes would wear out at a different rate, and so you would have one obverse matching with 2 different reverses and vice versa. So you could come up with a good sequence. So since we're talking mostly about the shield side, this is what the shield side is supposed to look like. On the left you have an explication of all the different regions. This is what's known as the coat of arms of the Spanish Habsburg monarchy. And then to the right is how these elements are typically rendered on a bogey. I use a simplified shorthand for, instead of drawing, which I'll tell you why in a minute, but the L means lions, C means castles, and then the other letters, you have Flanders, Tyrol, Naples, and Sicily. Those are represented by FTN and S. I use shorthand for all these things. The Flanders is a lion, and the Tyrol is an eagle, and Naples and Sicily are just dots, and then you have another lion at the bottom for Brabant. But I refer to these with letters because I don't want to give the idea that there was any kind of staticness to those designs. They change throughout time on these coins. And so this way, rather than showing the actual diagrams, it's better just use the letters as a placeholder. And that's the heart of the book. So that's basically where you start. And you can see at the bottom here, it's a more advanced version of that same diagram, but I'll explain in a second. I want to say first, if you're wondering about the title of the book, who was Arce? That refers to the name of the assayer. He was the mint official who was responsible for the weight and fineness of each of the coins. And Arce was the assayer who served as the assayer for the Bogota Mint from 1692 to 1722, which of course not only covers the 1715 fleet period, but is also pretty much the entire period of pirate concentration in the Caribbean. So a lot of tie-ins. When you read the book, you'll see that there's a lot of importance to all of that. It's not just the coin academic study of the coins. So the assayer was supposed to put some form of his name on the coin, in the coin information, in the legend. And usually it was just a letter, like an initial, and sometimes it was the whole name, like Arce could pute his whole name on, just ARCE, it was easy enough. And his full name, by the way, you can see in the signature top left, if you can read the old Spanish, it's Buenaventura de Arce Penagos. So kind of a long name, but Arce was what you hear. Right away, right off the bat, in 1692, he violated that rule. He omitted his mint mark and denomination on the coins, and then in 1700, he even took his name off the coins entirely. So something was going on. And around the same time, when the king changed from Charles II to Philip V, as we see at the bottom here, he started, I don't know if you can tell from the picture, but I tried to render it that Philip is punched over Carolus. So he just used a Carolus, which is Charles, die and put Philippus, which is Philip, right over top of it. But that's not too unusual, but that was what happened then, and you even have coins where there's one king on one side and the other king on the other. But what's strange is that after that little transition, he put Carolus back on the coins, even though Philip was king, and that was all the way until 1714. And as it turns out, that wasn't just random incompetence, it was actually intentional. So this is the heart of it. And I put this diagram together for the book because it tripped me up all the time. Everyone always talks about the Charles III pretender and the War of the Spanish Succession, but I thought it would be helpful to show everybody what the actual succession was. And so it was a period that was known as the War of the Spanish Succession. It lasted from 1701 to 1714. And what happened was that Charles II was sickly and died, and he had chosen Philip of Anjou, who was the grandson of the Sun King, French Sun King Louis XIV. Charles II had selected him to be his successor. The reason was that Spanish law allowed for succession to follow female lines. Charles had no issue of his own. So he chose Philip because his grandmother was Charles's half-sister. But there was another relative who was just as qualified along the female line, who rivaled Philip for the throne, and his name was Archduke Charles. That's why we say Charles the Pretender. He was the grandson of Charles II's aunt, Maria Anna, and the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand III. So what happened is that originally neither Philip nor Charles was in direct succession to their own houses with France and the Holy Roman Empire. So that was okay. But then what happened is Philip of Anjou's father died in 1711, and his older brother died in 1712. So then all of a sudden Philip was now the next in line to be king of France. And that was not really something that the rest of the world wanted. To have somebody who was king of both dynasties. And then on the other side, Archduke Charles, his older brother Joseph had become emperor after their father died in 1705, and then he died himself in 1711. So then Charles became the Holy Roman Emperor. And so that was another double dynastic candidate that the rest of Europe didn't want. So it was a real problem, and in the end, the way that the War of the Spanish Succession was settled was called the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 to 15. Philip was accepted as the new Spanish king, but he had to renounce his inheritance to the French throne, and also there was some land changes. So it was resolved, but as you can see, this was all taking place when the coins that were on the 1715 fleet were being made. So it's all tied in. When Charles II's death in 1700 was known in the New World, Arce started a period of transition on the coinage. As we saw, the name Philip was added, but they retained the name in some form of Charles, and that continued all the way until 1714 with just Charles posthumously. Now the problem that we had numismatically is that Restrepo and Lasser didn't really recognize the transition. They divided Arce's gold coins into lifetime and posthumous issues, but they didn't consider that there was a transition in between where the coins had very different details. So Restrepo, the book that Restrepo did, divided it into just 4 types. You have, I put A, B, C, D, but in his book it says Arc 1, Arc 2, Arc 3, that you can see here. And the difference is, if he tried to make it so that you could really see the differences. You see he copped out on lions and castles as well. He didn't put anything there. But you can look at the bottom half of the shield and see how it went from something more or less how it should have been to a flip-flop, and then they kind of gave up on some of the elements and just started putting X's and crosses, and so a lot of just small changes, but it's good from my standpoint because you can come up with a sequence. So when I started doing the 2021 talk, I made this little chart and came up with, I think it was, from the 4 designs, I changed it to 16 varieties that you can see in that little table there. And so then when I got into the die study in earnest, I came up with 34 different shield designs. I'm pretty confident that this is the whole list, but it's, and I had to learn a little bit about drawing on computers to come up with all these designs, but it was a fun little exercise. They may look somewhat similar, but once you get into it, each one has a small difference that really tells you a lot. And by the way, this is just the obverse. This is the front of the coin. The cross side, again, had some changes as well. I found, in the end, with the crosses too, I came up with 159, let me see, 159 different combinations for that year, that range. 1692 to 1714. Not all of Arce. I'm just talking about up to the end of the posthumous issue. 159 different combinations. If you do the math, that comes up to 7 combinations per year. So as long as you're able to identify these varieties, in theory, you should be able to determine the date, at least within a year or 2. So it's worth asking, I don't think I'm ready for this yet. Yeah, no, it's worth asking why Arce put Carolus back on the coins, and thereby creating a posthumous issue. And also in the process removing his own name from the coins, Arce's name. In light of the first 8 years from 1692 to 1700, I was willing to chalk this up as just a incompetence. It was actually in my research, which you'll see in the book, that it was a secondary engraver that came in, kind of like a lieutenant engraver, and he probably didn't know what he was doing. But as it turns out, there was more to the story. I took a tip from the esteemed Jorge Proctor and our mutual friend Phil Fleming, and started testing the coins. What you see here is a chart of XRF tests on the fineness of the coins. These are all the coins owned by the state of Florida, which is, I would say, a rare and valuable instance of hundreds of coins from the same source with similarly treated surfaces being accessible all at once. This is one of the beauties of a museum and a collection, is that a public museum in this case, where anybody can go in and do this, but it was a great tip, and what happened to my astonishment is that I discovered there was a secret debasement on these coins. There was a reduction in fineness. And Jorge's Proctor, which I think is solid, is that it was an emergency wartime measure. This was not unusual, really. The king himself had ordered, look, we need to save some money, just reduce the fineness, no one will notice. And especially if you're putting the old king's name back on the coin, yeah, nobody's going to know. But just in case, to cover it up, he said, well, the Assayer said, take my name off of it anyway, so just in case. Don't want posterity to throw me under the bus for that one. So there's no documentary proof. There is some documentary proof at another mint that similar things were going on at the same time, so there was reason behind the tip. But Jorge and I both were very excited that we found evidence. So anyway, back to the book itself. I've got it laid out into 3 main chapters. Again, lifetime, transitional, and posthumous. Or what I don't call it posthumous because the transitional issues are technically posthumous as well. I call it post-transitional. That's what you see on the left side there. The transitionals also include what I call half-transitionals, which you could picture that one side is transitional and the other side is not, and vice versa. But it's critical to separate those from the rest, not so much because of the changes of the arrangement in the shield designs, which is what happened, but primarily because of the changes in the legends. In addition to what we saw, the coins with, Philip punched over Charles, you also have coins with Charles on the obverse and Philip on the reverse, and just a lot of crazy varieties, actually, one of which I'll show you in a minute. And since the craziness that had started all the way back in 1692, I thought that was, pretty typical. You have things that are elements in the legend and on the shields that are transposed, retrograde, upside down. But my feeling is that if this book serves no other purpose for the general numismatic arena, it's just that we will acknowledge these 3 different types. It's a very basic arrangement, and right now catalogers and third-party certification services have no knowledge of this and don't follow it at all. I think it would simplify things quite a bit. In fact, you very often will see things from lifetime issues confused as transitional and post-transitional and vice versa. So as I say, if nothing else, I would like this to be the change that the book makes. I've included 2 appendices to include the coins that came after the Charles II coins, which began actually in 1718, best I can tell. And then a second appendix just for the 1 escudos, because I was talking about doubloons at this point, the 2 escudos, but there were also associated 1 escudos, which in a minute you'll see why that's important. The issue is that neither one of those types has enough examples out there to really do a die study. The 1715 fleet affords us the opportunity to study thousands of coins, but there are probably dozens of coins of the 2 that are treated in the appendices. Very small population. So I start each chapter with a quick reference guide to the varieties, the shield varieties, and then the cross varieties, but with less variation, and then a deeper analysis. You can also see that I have a timeline with the shield, so you can kind of see the sequence from left to right. And then after this summary, I list all of the die combinations. That's what you see on the left there, and then a photo catalog of the coins. And that's what comes up. That's where you get the 159 different combinations. In a lot of cases, I'll use multiple coins to show the variety, just because no one coin has everything you need to see. And so I think I used up to 4 different coins, and it resulted in 200 different coins being illustrated. Each one is referenced to the source auction or collection. Many of them were from the state of Florida collection. Several were from Queen's Jewels and I don't know what it's called, but NGC has a special section for coins that are 1715 fleet, and that's where I got most of that. Excuse me. So now, as I was hinting at, as I was compiling this, I've come up with several different strange errors that had been previously unpublished. And I want to take a look at just 3 of them. This one was the one that shocked me the most, just because it's so visually definitive and yet not. This coin at the top here, you can see in the legend, it says very clearly 1701, so it's dated 1701. But only by a die study was I able to match this up and find out that this had to have been made in 1710. So the last two digits of the date were transposed. The die engraver switched the 1 and the 0. Notice on the obverse of this coin, again, I use mostly the shield sides to determine the dates, not the other side. Notice how the lions and castles, their style, the lines are standing upright and they're in proper positions. And then the bottom half, you can't really see it in this photo, but it has a three-tiered arrangement, if you could match the dies, and that's indicative of 1701. More like what you see on the left side there. That is a true 1701, and you can see what I'm talking about, that the bottom half has 3 tiers instead of just 2. And then you can even see around the cross, the way, see how the ringlets between the arcs that go around the ends of the cross, instead of being on the outside, they're embedded, or they're between the arcs. Those are the kind of things that I look at to determine. And then on the right side, that's what a 1710 looks like. You can kind of see how that is way more similar to the subject coin at the top. So now let's look at that 1701 that was on the left. Let's look at that one more closely. And if you look carefully, you see at the top right, at about 1 to 2 o'clock, it says R.M. Well, if you know these coins, you'll know that it's supposed to say Hispaniarum Rex. Well, where does that fit into Hispaniarum Rex? The answer is at the end, not the beginning. So what actually I determined was that the legend was punched in counterclockwise. So instead of HISPANIARVM.rex, you have XER.MVRAINAPSIH. It's totally nonsensical, but when you get enough of the coins together, you start to see it, and you say, "Oh, that's what I'm looking at." Very crazy variety, and again, unpublished. And then the last one I'll talk about quickly is, because this one tripped me up for a little while, but then I realized when I started working on the one escudos, these 2 coins are the same obverse die. I initially looked at the 2 escudos at top and I said, why is that shield so much smaller? And it should have, as a numismatist, I should have realized that was indicative of a one escudo. But when I saw enough of them together, and then when I saw the one escudo as well, lo and behold. Now, while I was at it, I was able, because I couldn't see any of the 2 escudos, I was able to see in the legend that you have a figure 8 for an S for the king's name. It was only because of the one escudo that I was able to see that. A lot of puzzle pieces being put together, and it's something I enjoy doing. So the list goes on. There's all kinds of varieties, and you can have some fun looking through the book and seeing these. I think I'm just about out of time, so I'll just give you a quick shout out again to Ben Costello. He was quite a big help on this project, and I'll be presenting him with a book. I would also like to, of course, thank the 1715 Fleet Society, but mostly I'd like to single out the state of Florida, the Division of Historical Resources, Marie Prentice and Sam Wolford. I know Sam's giving a talk in a couple days, but I don't see him here, so Sam, you're not here, right? Okay, just making sure. They gave me time and access to everything. If you've been up to the State Museum in Tallahassee, it's actually closed. They had roof damage or something, and so for, I think, a number of years now, it's been closed, so it's only by private access, but it is a public collection, so if you are somebody that they have screened and they're confident that you're not there to rob them, they will give you access. But they were instrumental in helping me to get this done. I'll also mention the Mel Fisher organization was helpful. They have a database of coins from the 1750 fleet I was able to work from. Queen's Jewels, of course. And then countless auction houses and individuals. I will be recognizing them all with some complimentary copies of the books for their participation, but this is certainly not a one-man effort. This was the culmination of work from a lot of other people. And then lastly, again, Jorge Proctor and Phil Fleming, they had a lot of good big picture guidance, and their research is usually, it's unassailable, so it is very valuable. Then, well, last but not least, my partners in production team at Sedwick and Associates. Thank you to everybody, and happy reading, everyone. Enjoy. We have a question.
What were the dies made out of, and were the coins heated when they were struck?
Yes, the dies were made out of steel. That was the, yes, steel dies. We may have encountered one or two dies in our time from this period, not specific to these coins. So they're very rare. They wore out. The steel, as you can imagine, would rust, and they were not meant for long term. But the coins, yes, the metal was heated so that it could receive the design. Yeah.
It was heated.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
steel was even invented, so.
oh, sure. Yeah, they had steel. Yeah, yeah. When was steel invented?
No, it actually was. As a matter of
Okay.
fact, the swords were made out of temper steel, and so were the dice.
Yes, sir.
You said that the testing that you did showed a reduction in fineness. What was the other metal and how much percentage?
No, that's a very good question. I'm glad you asked. There are so many things I could talk about in the book, but that's what the book is for. I had initially thought, when I tested these coins, I found a significant amount of coins that had platinum in them. And so I thought that was the telltale sign of a fineness reduction. But as it turned out, that wasn't the case at all. It was simply that they had started using coins from mines in Panama, and I think in Colombia as well, that had platinum, and they didn't know what to do with platinum. Yep. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. The Darien and the Choco area.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Again, in
they
trouble.
had never experienced platinum before, so they actually had no idea what platinum was.
So it was really just a part of the mix. But the gold itself, even within that containing platinum, you could see there was a 1% reduction dramatically in, I think it was 1703, where it specifically went down and stayed down. I think it had gone down a little bit prior to that as well, but it was very dramatic when you look at the coins prior to the 1680s and the coins after 1714. Those coins that I tested were all at least 1 or 2% higher in fineness, in gold, pure gold. Yes, sir.
How were the plants cut from the bar? In the picture, it looked like they had a pair of trimming shears.
Well, that's, there's a little speculation about that. That's more like something that would be covered in the practical book of Cobb's. There's some theory that we call them Cobb's because it's Cabo de Barra, meaning end of the bar, but that's probably not true. There are other reasons, but nobody really knows. I mean, there were various methods for different mints. And in this period, in most of the Spanish colonial period, my feeling is that they poured the metal into what we call straps or rieles, and then they balanced them and cut them from there. But in different periods, we're not really sure. Yeah, different mints in different periods. I think we have a question in the back there real quick.
Yeah, what were these dyes made of and how were they produced?
Yeah, well, we had the question already. They're steel dyes, but I'll go into it a little bit more because I think this is your actual question. When you heat the steel, you can stamp things into it. They didn't just take a die and scratch on it and say, well, this is what the design is. They had punches, particularly all those things that I represented with the letter. Those were punches. There was a lion punch, there was a castle punch, there was an eagle punch. And it was up to the engraver, the die engraver, to create these punches, after the initial, at least. And you use those punches to create the die. There were some things that were placed by hand, obviously, but all the elements were there. You just had to stamp them into the die. That also worked for the lettering in the legend, for example. I don't think it applies here, but there are a lot of cases where you only have the letters that make up the typical legend, and so you have to create a different punch or just hand do it on the fly when it's not one of the standard letters. Yes, ma'am.
So it's made up of separate dies rather than just one die print? It's like they had to do like a...
Yeah, you would take the punches and punch it into the die. The punches were more like what the coin looks like, and then it goes in reverse, and the die shows it in reverse, and then it puts it back in regular form.
But it sounded like you were saying that maybe there were a couple of different dyes that people were using and then adding to make one design rather than one design is the dye.
Yeah, those are
That makes
concepts.
sense.
There are
Right.
concepts, and each one is individual to make the dye.
Why didn't they just make one?
I think the short answer is that they wore out. You can delay that by using punches, and punches would wear out too, but you could save the punch a little bit by just punching it into the die once, and then the die took the brunt of the damage by making coin after coin after coin, but then you still have the punch for the next die. Yes, sir, over there.
My question is during that same period of time, did you see a reduction in the quality of gold coins from Mexico and wherever else they were actually minting coins?
Yeah, that's more a question for Jorge Proctor, but that was the genesis of this. He had discovered the same thing going on in Mexico Mint, but I think it was the silver,
It was the
right?
silver, and it's
Yeah.
only the king silver. So-
Right. It is complicated,
Yeah,
but
it's
yes,
complicated.
the short answer is yes. All right, if there are no other questions, I think, we're covered.
About how many coins do you think would be done with which one of those, so before they got more now?
Well, that's the golden question, and it's really hard to say. For another topic, I had done a little bit of a study to show a ratio in which you could tell how many dies per year, but whatever it was, I think this particular era blows it out of the water, because to have 7 different combinations per year, I think that was quite a bit more than it should have been. But I don't have an answer. I don't know the exact rate. Perhaps Jorge does, but it's worth talking to Jorge privately about anything and everything related to this. Okay, Ben, can I turn it over to you again?
Thanks again.